Welcome back, everybody. This is Beat the Big Guys with Sandy Rosenthal. Hi, I'm your host, and I'm really excited about the guest that is with us today. He comes from the great state of California, and his name is Brett Hoffstadt. Hello, Brett.
Hi, Sandy. Thanks very much for having me on your awesome show.
Oh my gosh, you're so welcome. This will be my 68th episode. I really cannot believe it. This was a bit of a fantasy for me to actually host my own show. And considering I was born with severe hearing problems and speaking problems, I still can't believe I'm actually host of a podcast where I have to use my voice and my ears. So it's again, it's a bit of a fantasy. And if I'm coming up on episode 68, I guess I must have overcome those problems that I had growing up. So very exciting. And thank you so much for being here, Brett. So I'm going to tell our listeners a little bit about you before we get started. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
No, Brett Hofstadt has 2 degrees in aerospace engineering, 4 aviation patents, and a history of being a bit of a troublemaker against the status quo during his 25-year career in the aerospace and defense industry. Brett has fought against the forces of complacency and cover-ups from both the inside and the outside of these organizations. I can't wait to hear more. I just can't wait because these sounds like these were big organizations that you were fighting against, and which can be daunting. But
Yes, they are. And I've definitely learned a lot of lessons. So, yeah, I'm happy to share those and hopefully they'll benefit your listeners.
great. I'm all ears. So please, Brett, please go ahead, take as long as you need to tell your story, and we're all going to be waiting with bated breath.
Okay, well, thanks again, Sandy. So, I have thought and reflected a lot about experiences I've gone through. And I think it would help to just summarize them into 3 key lessons, recommendations I have for people if you're trying to fight against the status quo in large organizations, and especially, at least my experiences from aviation and aerospace. So for most of my career, I worked for the biggest, as in B, aerospace company. And if it starts with a B, you know which one I'm talking about. And that was it. And so, but here's what I learned. Well, the first lesson is whenever you're going to try and do something different that challenges the status quo or contrasts with the current paradigm, you have to come from a place of unimpeachable integrity and work ethic first. You have to be the kind of person that just has a great reputation, is known to get the job done, and is good to work with, so that you have to remove excuses from people to discount you. Okay, if you're a trusted, reliable person, really that is the baseline. So you have to work on that if that's still an issue for you, I would say. And because what you're going to do is going to create a lot of risk for yourself, and you'll need to build trust from people. You'll have to get their ear to listen to you and respect you. The second lesson is you have to establish some top cover, as they call it. I'll use aviation analogies probably, but basically you have to, however you can, work on getting some high-level support for your mission or your change. That means executive support. Maybe find an executive. It could mean also finding a wingman or wingwoman. That's also essential to be your partner, because when you're by yourself, you can be considered a lone nut. But when you find one person, now you become a movement and you gain instant credibility. So one example is when I was at this aerospace company, I really was frustrated by the lack of change and innovation we had in our company. It was complacency. People didn't have a burning desire to change, innovate in the company as much as I thought we should have, even though it's known for innovation. So I wanted to create some internal innovation challenges, or more of a startup entrepreneurial sense. So for instance, one example is it was in the 2012 timeframe, and we had not yet started 3D printing in my division, and it was happening all around us. I said, we got to do this. It's taking us 6 months to make an order for parts, send it to a vendor, bring it into us, whereas in literally a day, we could be building these parts ourselves in-house. Right? So I eventually got the ear of an executive who was on board with me, and people had been trying for, people told me, who I talked to, like 7 or 8 years to bring 3D printing into our company. And after I found the key people and got on their side and got their support, within 6 months, we were holding the part from our first 3D printer in our hands. So that is magic when you get that support. Another example, that same executive helped us create a dedicated space inside the company for employee innovation projects, just like our own internal incubator. So I had some plans and goals, and he said, well, here's what I think we should do. And I had some different ideas, but he was the executive with the support and the funding and the relationships to work within the organization. And he paved the path and made it happen. So that's another key thing. I could give maybe come back to another story with a wingman, wingwoman partner. There's a great video I'll share, hopefully, but I encourage everyone to listen and watch it on YouTube. It's from Derek Sievers, who was the founder of CD Baby, which revolutionized the recording industry for music artists. Because, just a side tangent, CD Baby now and home studios allow any musician to beat the big guys in the recording industry, right? Because they have those tools available. So Derek Sievers is a huge leader and influencer for that, for music. And I have a music background too. That's why I love him. But he has a video called Leadership Lessons from the Dancing Man. Are you familiar with that by any chance, Sandy?
I'm not.
Okay. Well, it's a great video. It's only 3 minutes long, and it shows the power of starting a movement when you're just one person by yourself. It's actually the second person that joins you that makes a difference and changes the whole paradigm. Right? So you probably can testify to that too, right? Yeah. Okay, so that's the point when you're trying to work within an organization or even outside. When you find that first partner for yourself, a colleague, a collaborator, that changes things. So if you don't have that yet, I'd say look for that. And the third lesson I'll say is always have an exit plan or a contingency plan, or an alternating landing spot. If you're flying an airplane, you always know, if you take a cross-country trip as a private pilot, at every point on your destination, before you fly, you need to plan alternate landing zones. If you lose an engine during your flight, you should always have a place where you can land. So when you're trying to innovate within an organization or challenge them from the outside also, you really need a backup plan if things go sideways, if things blow up on you, so to speak. So that's why here I want to show this. This was a great book for me. I wonder if you're familiar with it, The Whistleblower's Handbook.
I believe I have heard of that one. Yes.
Okay.
When was that published?
It was published, gosh, let me see, long time ago. Well, 2011. So
that's why I'm familiar with it. Right.
Over
long time ago.
Yep. That's great if you're inside an organization trying to, of course, that's more if it's some kind of scandal, or cover up, you definitely want to read that book. But the other thing I would recommend, and people probably think of this already, is if you can build a parallel income or dual income stream, independent income stream for yourself, so that you're not just relying on a paycheck. That's easier said than done, but that gives you a lot of freedom and independence, right, and courage. And so that's actually something I do help people with now. Since I have written and published my own books, I help other people who are experts or change agents, help them publish their own book. And so I've created a website called boostwithabook.com. You can find me, or you can find me on LinkedIn at Brett Hoffstadt. And I really believe that books are powerful because
Mhm.
ideas change the world, and books are the best vehicle to transmit ideas still. Videos and podcasts are also awesome. So, your podcast is amazing and influential, but books are timeless. They'll always be with us. So, those are my 3 lessons, and I can maybe perhaps share some more stories and insights and details, but you can take it from here.
Absolutely. So thank you for so you this has been a little interesting way of doing it. Usually people tell their stories and wrap up with their 3 bits of advice. So you've started with the advice, but and now we're going to tell now we're looking forward to hearing the story that that is the reason you have all this great advice, and it's all fabulous advice, and we're going to talk more about it in the Q&A. But we do have some time here. If you could take a few minutes and tell us your story and how you beat the big guys, or if it's still going on. Some people I interview are still fighting.
Right.
So, but anyway, this is your story. I won't put any words in your mouth.
Okay, well, so I will say perhaps I've had more failures than successes as I look back on things, but they've all been learning. I have had successes. So the most success I've had, I believe, is when I was inside the organization trying to affect change from within it. But it hasn't been every organization. I've worked in other companies where I learned that I tried to work too fast, too abruptly. And there's a good analogy I also like where if you are inside an organization trying to create change, you could be seen as an invader to their systems. And it's like an organism that has an invader. It can activate the antibodies to squash it. Right? So every organization has an antibody defense. It's called the bureaucracy. It's their systems. It could be the legal department. It could be just management. So one challenge is, I think people have to consciously think about this, is to not activate the antibodies of the organization when you're trying to enact change. So some examples of that, again, I'll say the 3D printing, bringing that into the company, and other innovation projects. So I'll give you another example from this. I learned in my innovation research, some companies like 3M and Google offered their employees 10% time to do whatever they want, work on their own projects. And so they're not constrained by job codes, time codes, and their official assigned duties, but they have a lot of skills and strengths that they know would benefit the organization and would be, passionate for them. So I thought, how can we do this in our company? Where, because we were a defense contractor, we had to be ruthless with reporting our time because it was all federal contracts. So every day before we left work, we had to fill out our time card to the nearest 10th of an hour for all the time we spent, which means every 6 minutes. Right.
Wow.
So imagine there's like no freedom to do your own projects that way. Right.
Right.
And so I thought, how can we innovate within that constraint? So here again is also where you have to be unimpeachable with your behavior and your actions. You can't break the law. You have to do things by the book. But what I did was realize that we had the ability to flex our time, like work a 980 schedule. It's pretty common now, where you work extra hours some days and then you get off one day every other week, for instance. So we had the ability to do that. So I proposed, let's just work a half hour extra each day, and then every other Friday we'll only have 4 hours off from our schedule. So we'll still work half a day, but then the other half of the day we'll stay at work, but we'll have our own time then. We'll stay in the office, but we'll have our own time. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And so I arranged it so that we did it for 4 hours in the afternoon for people on the East Coast. It would be 4 hours in the morning for people on the West Coast. So we all had the same actual time. And then I said, let's self-organize to do this. And then you can either work on your own project by yourself, or you can find someone else to partner with, make a little team and work on your own projects together. But it's up to you to find those people, flex your schedules the same way, and then work on it. So we did it once, and I promoted it within our internal website page. It was like an internal LinkedIn page for the company. And just that very first time, we had a huge response. It was maybe not a lot of people, 20 or 30 people across the whole company. But out of those 4 hours, we had new websites built and launched. We had workshops built and planned. We had new software programs written, even in that 4 hours. We had invention patents submitted for new invention ideas, all these things. And it was amazing, in only 4 hours. And so I thought that was great. I was very happy with it. And then a big surprise came to me a few days later as we were reporting our results and sharing them on the website. Somebody called my desk and he said, "Hey, the CEO of our company just replied to your posts about what we did last week." And I nearly had to change my pants because that was scary. And but he
Wow.
replied, got his attention, and he said, "This is great. We need to do more things like this."
Fabulous. Fabulous. And you did it within the system. You did it following these rules that you laid out, and you still were able to create these changes in what I would guess would be one of the most entrenched, intractable organizations there is, I would guess.
Yep.
That's
it seemed like it at the
fabulous.
time. Yep.
Fabulous. Do you have a little more to share? Is it okay if I jump in and start asking some questions?
Sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
Are you okay,
I mean,
great.
feel
Well,
free.
so this is my guest today, Brett Hoffstadt, is a little bit in a different situation than many of my guests who are trying to change things, for example, in their community, like for example, a big chemical company is trying to move into their pristine community and foul the air and the water and the land. So in this situation, similar to I have two other guests who were actually medical doctors, and they were trying to create changes within their hospitals. So those were absolutely within entrenched organizations, and they were successful as well. And so it's a little bit different, but not a lot. And for example, one of the pieces of advice, Brett, that you gave was you can't have the appearance of being all by yourself. Even if you are all by yourself, even if it is all your idea, you can't give that appearance that others believe you are a loner. Because
Right. So
even if you are the rightest human being on the planet, the rightest, if there is such a word as the rightest, the most right person, if you're perceived as alone, doesn't matter. So you were going to comment on that? You were going to respond?
right. So I do believe that's true. And one strategy or lesson I would give to recommend to people if you're trying to move beyond that situation is to look for the weak signals around you. You probably do have supporters or fans. Chances are, especially in today's world, you're not alone. There definitely are people out there. I think you need to assume that. But this is where it comes back to my first lesson, which is you have to really be a respectable, trustworthy person who people are comfortable associating with, and even are attracted to work with, not romantically, but just as a person, right? With somebody who has a high standing, a high professionalism, even if you're just a private citizen. So, because if you, I know it's difficult when you're really passionate about something and just you're right, you want to do more. It's easy to be over the top, a little extreme, right? But you really have to work on yourself to be professional, approachable, and then going back to the weak signals is any sign of support or sympathy you find around you. That's something you need to pursue, and amplify and magnify, and then that's how you can give the perception that you're not alone, because you need to be able to attract these other people to you that are like-minded, and then embrace them and include them in your effort. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. It makes total sense. And our listeners need to understand the group doesn't have to be gigantic. but there needs to be a core group, even if it's 5 people. You'd be amazed at how much a group of just 5 people can get accomplished. I've seen it over and over and over on my podcast, listening to these groups. Most of them are very, very small, and still they were able to accomplish what they set out to do. So why, Brett, do you call the support weak signals? WEAK, weak. Why do you call them weak signals?
Well, because it comes from, I have a background in project management also, and
Okay.
especially complex large projects. And there's a whole body of work about complex systems that I find fascinating. And that's what happens in our society when a lot of people get together. We're living in complex systems all around us, right? So things are not linear, things are not predictable, they're not fixed, simple like billiard balls moving on a table. There's things that happen that are just unexpected, and so it's called emergence. Things just happen out of nowhere, it seems, kind of like the butterfly effect, if you've heard that analogy.
Mm-mm.
Okay, so that briefly is the butterfly effect is one butterfly disturbs the air somewhere, and maybe it makes a flower change, but basically it creates a chaos, a random sequence of events. Those random events build on each other, and then the analogy goes something like, it can cause somebody to die, or something strange happens, but it all traces back to that butterfly that did something. So
now I've actually heard of that. That was discussed in the incredible strange story of Benjamin Button. But
okay.
They didn't call it butterfly theory, but yes, I'm familiar with it.
Okay. So let's see, I'm trying to go back to your point that, weak signals. So
weak signals.
So we live, really, I think people have to appreciate what benefits we live in today's world, because we have social media. We have the ability to start things ourselves, like a podcast, like a Facebook group, like a website. It's really incredible. A lot of my experiences from outside these organizations were pre-social media, like in the 2000s, and before Facebook. And looking back on it now, we had the ability to make a website, but that was really not enough. Somehow a lot of my efforts never really went viral like they needed to be successful. And so I think social media is a great advantage now. So let me give another recommendation for people. I'm really curious to know if you're familiar with this book. It's called Tribes by Seth Godin. Have you heard of that? No? Okay, well, this also, I would say, is a must read for people. Seth Godin is an author, entrepreneur, but he really is a fan of change agents and picking yourself to make a difference. And he has awesome books, but the best one, I think, for this topic and your audience is called Tribes, and it's how to build a group.
Okay.
How to build a movement. And this is a book that really inspired and enabled me within my company, within my employer, to create change and find others and connect with others. But it's helped outside of organizations too. And so Tribes by Seth Godin, I just can't recommend that enough.
Thank you for that recommendation, because really, if you are going to beat the big guys and lead the effort, you do need to work with other people. You may not have to work with hundreds of people, but you will have to work with other people. Bring them on as allies. There's a couple of things I want to point out about that can't be understated, can't be overstated, how bringing on others to join you in your cause, because you cannot appear to be alone. You don't want to give that appearance, and you're not. And another reason, you're not alone. I mean, as you pointed out when you were talking earlier, you weren't alone when you had your ideas. As smart as you are, you can't be the only smart guy at these companies you worked at. There's other people too who that when you bring up your idea, they're going, yeah, yeah, that's a good idea too. I really agree with that. I'd love to see something like that going on here. And your advice to our listeners was be listening, be watching, be looking for that support because it's out there. But not everybody is willing to open up their mouth and say something and do something about it. But they'll be okay joining somebody else who's already doing it. When
Right.
I started my organization, levies.org, didn't want to lead a whole new organization from scratch. I worked for weeks trying to find another organization that was already doing the work that I was burning to do. I couldn't find one. And I said, well, I guess I'm going to have to do it. So the reason I told this short story is because, yes, there are others that want to do the work, and you just have to bond with them and find them. I also wanted to point out, you mentioned, Brett, that had a lot of non-successes, that you'd made mistakes. Well, that's okay. My list, I wrote a book. I had a whole chapter about all my mistakes. And the only reason it's not in my book is because the publisher had to whittle down the number of words in my final copy of my book. But I learned from those mistakes, and I learned how to do the job that needed to be done properly because of the mistake. So I wouldn't say there's anything that I'd spent time on that I would give that didn't work. I'm going to start all over again, Landry. I wouldn't say there's a single thing I worked on with my organization, levies.org, that I don't regret because I didn't learn something. Even if something doesn't pan out the way you thought it would, even if an idea didn't generate what I hoped it would, I still learned from it. So it's all good.
Well, it's good. I'm glad you made that decision. What I've decided is when we're faced with a big dilemma, a risky mission that we want to pursue, we're either going to have the pain of regret of not doing it, not taking action, or we could have the pain of regret of not making the impact we want. But I decided I would much rather have the pain of learning and trying and maybe failing versus the pain of knowing I could have done something. If it weren't for me, nothing would happen, and I did nothing. So
well said, and I'm not going to be too Pollyanna that if you're trying to change the world, which you are, when you're trying to beat the big guys, you're making the world a better place. It's going to take a little longer than you thought, and it's going to be a little harder than you thought, but that's okay. That's okay. Once get to work, and once you've seen what can happen, what can be done, if you're like me, and if you're like Brett, you're probably more focused about the work that needs to be done next than you're looking at the work that's already been done behind you. And you don't really have time to sit down and what do they call it? Rest on your laurels, because there's probably more work to be done, but that's okay. So don't let mistakes bother you. I know I don't. Again, I think some of the best ideas arose out of mistakes.
Yeah. So if I could give a short story to give people some context. So one of the failures I'm talking about that I'm proud of, even though it didn't result the way we wanted, was a case where I was by myself, but I found a wingman, and it was hopefully some people will remember, it was exactly 1 month and 1 day after 9/11 in 2001. It was November 12th that year, on Veterans Day. There was another fatal aircraft disaster in New York City, no less. It was Flight 587 from American Airlines that crashed into Jamaica Bay in the water. You probably don't remember it. Maybe you do.
Oh, yeah. I remember I was a fitness instructor at Tulane University at the time, and I was so upset about that, I stayed home. I thought it was another example of what happened on 9/11. I thought it was another incident like
Right.
that. So yes, I remember it extremely well. But anyway, go on.
Well, so that my warning flags and everything, perked up as soon as that happened also, because it was right after 9/11. It was a beautiful, clear day in the daytime. and the plane fell out of the sky just shortly after takeoff. And there were early reports that people saw smoke or flames coming from the aircraft when it came down, but also it broke up in air before it hit the ground because they showed this on the news. They pulled the vertical tail out of the water, but the plane itself crashed on land into houses in the neighborhood. So there's no good reason for a plane to break up in air right when it's after it's taking off.
What was the official explanation?
So the official explanation was the pilot hit turbulence and overreacted with his rudder inputs and broke the vertical tail.
And what do you think happened?
So, well, this became a long story that really, it consumed 3 years of my life. This was one of my outside activities, and it was not the pilot's fault. It was almost certainly one of the first shoe bombers or somebody with a bomb on board. So it was a terrorist attack because all the evidence points to it. The radar signals, the evidence, physical evidence, plenty of eyewitness testimonies, many people who were professional aircraft observers, even, and other pilots. It was, and also what the government did not do, because if you think about when our space shuttles were lost or other aircraft, what do they do when they search for evidence? They go to where the first pieces are found, because
Okay.
wherever the first pieces are, that's where the source, that's where the problem started, right?
Right.
Well, we knew in this accident that the first pieces from the aircraft that fell off fell into the water because we saw them in the boats pulling them out of the water. And we know some of those objects sunk in the water because parts on aircraft are heavy, right? So how long do you think it should have taken, and do you know how long it did take for them to send scuba divers into the water to find those earliest parts?
And they should have been sent down immediately,
right?
Because
Guess
the
what?
materials degrade.
They never done it. They've never done it since.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
So that shows they were not serious about it, right?
For whatever reason, I'm not, none of this surprises me. And have so thank you. I'm not surprised to hear this. Things like this are going on every day all around us, not usually not as catastrophes such as that, but things are going on all around us. We need to pay attention, be aware, ask questions. It's okay to ask questions. I've been in situations where just by asking a question, that's been received with aggression. Why are you asking a question? Well, when you get an aggressive response to a question, they've got something to hide.
Yeah.
So
but the failure there, Sandy, is
yes.
So I got connected with a New Yorker. I was living outside of Philadelphia at the time, but there was a New Yorker who was also suspicious and upset with the way the investigation was going. And he made a website. It's called USREAD, USREAD.com. And we basically became the nucleus. I was pretty much his second person. He was like you, or maybe the lone nut, trying to figure this out, but I joined him. So we became a team.
As the expert.
Right. And so we basically spooled up an independent investigation team for this accident. And we did our darndest for many years to question the NTSB. We wrote independent commentaries on the evidence based on public reports. We did get some local news coverage, which was nice. That got even some TV coverage, which was a nice exception. But it really, as you know, just from knowing our history of what is portrayed, it didn't break through the walls there. But yeah.
But I have to point out, the record will show that this information was out there and was put out there within 3 years of this incident happening. The record will show, and nobody can erase that record. So
yeah, it is out there. Unfortunately,
it's out there.
You have to look harder than I wish for it, but it is out there.
But it is out there. And one day when the truth finally comes out, and it will, truth always does, the record will show that that's what you said from the very beginning. So which is what one of the reasons I have a book. The book shows, the record will show. And you can't let that stop you, just because everyone doesn't agree with you. You still got to get it out there, get your material out there, and it's not that expensive. Websites are very inexpensive. I got someone to publish a book for me, so so I did write a book, but get the story out there. And also, I see you followed that piece of advice that we talked about earlier: is you don't want to appear alone. You have to work with a group, even if it's a small group. So we're about run out of time, Brett. Is there any last word of wisdom you'd like to share for our listeners?
Sure. Well, thanks again, Sandy. I would say congratulations on publishing your book. I believe a book can really be a change agent, pivotal influence to change your message and your mission. So if they're thinking of publishing a book for their own mission, and I'd love to help them. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Brett Hoffstadt, and I'm also on Twitter, Brett Rocket Sci, and I've built some resources and give some training for people to help them publish and self-publish their own book. So yeah, I salute you for what you've done, and I'd love to help others out there if I can.
Thank you so much, Brett. Is it all right with you if I publish the video version of this interview on my playlist on YouTube?
That would be great. I'd be honored. Yep.
Great. So you all heard that. This podcast is also available in the video form. Thank you so much, Brett. And thank all of you, the listeners, for joining us today. Please be sure to rate and subscribe to this podcast on all of your favorite platforms. And remember, no matter who you are, you too can beat the big guys. Okay, I'm just going to stop recording. It's also thundering and lightning out.